In the quiet village of Umuaka, surrounded by tall palm trees and dusty footpaths, life moved slowly and peacefully. The villagers were simple people. Farmers, traders, and fishermen who lived their lives with strong faith in God. At the center of the village stood a small white church with a rusty bell hanging at the entrance. Every Sunday morning, before the sun rose too high in the sky, the villagers gathered there to worship. Leading them was a man everyone respected deeply, Pastor Daniel. To the people of Umuaka, Pastor Daniel was not just a preacher. He was a spiritual father, a man they believed had been chosen by God to guide their lives. When he spoke, people listened. When he prayed, people believed miracles would happen. Every Sunday he stood proudly behind the wooden pulpit, dressed in his bright white suit, preaching powerful messages about love, kindness, patience, and humility. The congregation admired him. Some even said he was the most righteous man they had ever known. But sometimes, what people see in public is not always the truth. Because behind the pulpit, behind the loud prayers and holy words, there was another story. A story hidden behind the walls of Pastor Daniel's home. A story that no one in the village knew. Not yet. Pastor Daniel lived with his wife Grace in a small house not far from the church. Grace was a quiet woman. Gentle, respectful, and hardworking. She supported her husband faithfully and rarely spoke much in public. In church, she always sat quietly in the front row, smiling politely as her husband preached powerful sermons. But if anyone looked closely into Grace's eyes, they would see something strange. A sadness. A deep sadness she tried very hard to hide. Because when the church doors closed and the villagers returned to their homes, Pastor Daniel became a completely different man. The kind and loving preacher the villagers admired disappeared. In his place was a man filled with anger. A man whose voice often echoed loudly through the walls of their house at night. Grace had learned to live carefully around him. She spoke softly, walked gently, and tried her best not to upset him. But sometimes, no matter how careful she was, Pastor Daniel would still become angry. And when his anger rose like a storm, Grace became its victim. Night after night, she endured harsh words, cruel insults, and painful treatment from the same man who stood every Sunday preaching about love. Yet she told no one. Not a single soul. Because in the village of Umuaka, Pastor Daniel was a man of God. And who would ever believe such a terrible story about a holy pastor? For many months, Grace carried her suffering in silence. Every morning she woke up early, prepared food for her husband, and went about her daily duties as if everything was normal. But pain has a way of revealing itself even when someone tries to hide it. One day, after Sunday service, an elderly woman named Mama Ada began to notice something unusual. Mama Ada was one of the oldest members of the church. She had watched many pastors come and go throughout the years. Her eyes were wise, and her heart was sensitive to the pain of others. As the congregation slowly left the church that day, Mama Ada noticed Grace standing alone near the church door. Her smile looked forced. Her eyes looked tired. Slowly, Mama Ada walked toward her. "My daughter," she said gently, "your eyes look heavy with sorrow. Is everything all right?" Grace quickly smiled and shook her head. "Yes, Mama Ada. I am fine." But Mama Ada was not convinced. As Grace turned to leave, Mama Ada noticed something that made her heart skip. A bruise on Grace's arm. A dark mark that looked as if someone had grabbed her roughly. Grace quickly covered it with her wrapper and walked away. But Mama Ada stood there silently, watching her leave. Something was terribly wrong. And Mama Ada knew it. That night, Mama Ada could not sleep. The image of Grace's bruised arm kept appearing in her mind again and again. She knelt beside her bed and prayed quietly. "Lord," she whispered, "if there is pain hidden in this house of worship, reveal the truth." Days passed. Then one evening, Mama Ede finally found Grace sitting alone under a mango tree behind the church. Grace looked tired. Her face carried the weight of many sleepless nights. Mama Eda slowly sat beside her. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then Mama Ede gently placed her hand on Grace's shoulder. "My daughter," she said softly, "you do not have to suffer alone." Those words were enough to break the wall Grace had built around her pain. Tears slowly filled her eyes. For the first time in a long time, Grace spoke the truth she had been hiding. "Pastor Daniel beats me," she whispered. Mama Eda's heart nearly stopped. She could not believe what she was hearing. The same man who stood every Sunday preaching about love was hurting his own wife. Tears rolled down Grace's face as she spoke. "I was afraid no one would believe me." But Mama Eda held her hand firmly. "My daughter," she said, "darkness cannot hide forever." And for the first time, Grace felt a small spark of hope. The following Sunday, the church was filled as usual. Villagers sat quietly as Pastor Daniel stood proudly behind the pulpit, preparing to deliver another powerful sermon. He opened his Bible and began to speak about righteousness and holiness. But before he could continue, a voice suddenly interrupted him. "Mr. Pastor, tell the church how you treat your wife." The entire congregation turned in shock. It was Mama Ede standing in the middle of the church. Silence filled the room. Then slowly, Grace stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. "The man who preaches love to you every Sunday beats me in our home." Gasps spread across the congregation. People looked at Pastor Daniel in disbelief. Some shook their heads. Others lowered their eyes in disappointment. One of the church elders stood up and spoke firmly. "A shepherd who harms his own household cannot lead God's people." That day, Pastor Daniel lost the respect he once enjoyed. And Grace finally found her freedom. The villagers of Umuaka learned a powerful lesson that day. A title does not make a man righteous. True righteousness is revealed not by the words spoken behind the pulpit, but by the way we treat the people closest to us.
A title does not make a man holy. True righteousness is revealed in how we treat those closest to us.